My name is Brett Loubert. I lead our U.S. space practice, and I work across Space Force. So at Deloitte, we're helping our clients with a broad range of services in this truly exciting market. It includes things like strategy, IT modernization, defense and cyber operations, supply chain, and back office transformation. So a little bit about me and the passion I have for this particular topic. I have a background in engineering space systems, and relevant to this conversation, I spent several years as a systems engineer building a globally and tactically deployed communication network for the DoD that relied heavily on commercial SATCOM providers. And at Deloitte, we actually do a pretty good amount of work with the Space Force's Commercial Satellite Communications Office, which leads me really well to our guest, Craig Miller, who sits really at the nexus of military and commercial SATCOM. So Craig is the president for government systems at Viasat. In this role, he is responsible for leading the company's global defense business, which exceeds $1 billion in annual revenues by delivering cost-effective, innovative solutions to challenging defense requirements in satellite networks, tactical data links, information assurance, and cybersecurity. Before I give the mic to Craig to finish out his introduction, we're both electrical engineers. I figured that out based on our bios. And I doubt we ever thought we'd be in the unfortunate position of following General Hyten in a panel. Really, just truly, I guess an honor that we're sort of maybe on the same level as General Hyten. I don't know. Craig, over to you.
Hey, Brett, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, literally walking in the shadows of giants here. So pretty cool to get to share the stage with someone like General Hyten. Tough act to follow, but hopefully we'll try to keep this one interesting and engaging. I think we've got some interesting topics here about the use of commercial capabilities in space and what that means for the DoD and the way forward. So I'm excited about the conversation here.
That's excellent. All right, let's get started with a couple questions here. So, with adversaries rapidly developing their space capabilities, what are a few of the new emerging space network capabilities that the DoD and our allies will use to keep pace?
Well, I think at the macro level, this is a really good transition from the conversation that we just watched, and really the proliferation of commercial capabilities and the rapid advancement of commercial capabilities. And sometimes we talk about the democratization of space that's happening, but this is a real effect of it. The commercial Earth observation capabilities have been transformational. We've seen that in the conflict with Ukraine, where you can rely on commercial capabilities to see, for example, exactly where GPS works and where GPS doesn't, and troop movements, even the electromagnetic spectrum can be monitored by commercial capabilities. And there's just so much data and so many capabilities out there that this is a whole new world. Historically, this has been the province of DoD purpose-built capabilities, but now there's this incredible data out there that can be leveraged. And side by side with that, there's a proliferation of commercial communications capabilities out there. And some of these capabilities, we hear a lot about the proliferated LEO constellations, but the Viasat-3 network that we'll be bringing online too, both of these capabilities have incredible capacity, orders of magnitude more capacity than what's available before. And these commercial capabilities also have defensive features or inherent defensive capabilities that would put them into the realm of what would in the past be considered protected SATCOM. But these commercial capabilities have resilience attributes that rival military SATCOM capabilities, and the pace that they're being developed, it's just going so fast that it gives it's a potential advantage that can be leveraged by the DoD. And so the ability to use some of these commercial capabilities and to bring them into a network that they can use and to leverage this data in real time and at the speed it's being created is a huge potential advantage that the DoD and our allies can leverage.
Yeah, I think on a similar sort of theme, right? So we've seen Space Force leadership talk about the priority in the next 5 or 10 years around building a sort of resilient network architecture, resiliency in all levels, disaggregation in all levels. How do you think about and approach achieving resilience, and how can government and commercial space sector kind of work together on this?
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways to think about this. And so there's multiple ways you can measure resiliency. One obvious way that's in the news that you hear a lot about is resistance to kinetic effects. And so, distribution and proliferation are a way to mitigate the potential kinetic effects, but cyber defense is really important. So one of the things where you create with proliferation and distribution, for example, you create a larger attack surface. And so, you have to make sure you have an adequate cyber defense or a top-notch cyber defense against peer adversaries. Jamming is going to be an issue. And so we see the proliferation of low-cost portable jamming. And so our FFX against these satellites are going to be an issue. Simply congestion too. If a network is full and you try to surge more capacity onto it and it doesn't have the room to bring more capacity on, that's a kind of failure of resilience. And so there's all these dimensions that you have to measure resilience, and really no one network's probably going to be the best at all of them. And then just in the concept of creating an architecture around resilience with all these different attributes to consider, there's sort of two approaches that you can take. You can try to make an individual network more resilient. So you can, this is historically how MilSatCom protected networks have been. You try to make one network that's incredibly resilient and it's hard to disrupt. And you can do this for a certain set of requirements, but it tends to be very expensive. And you still, in any one system, there tends to be single or a few points of failure. And so there's always some attack vector that you can get to it with. It may be in the cyber domain, it may be in the ground, it may be in the space segment, it may be in terms of performance, but trying to make one network the end-all be-all uber resilient network is very expensive and tends to be prone to failure. The other approach is by adding more networks or by adding optionality. And this approach is much more scalable. It can be much more flexible. And if you do it right, it can be a lot less expensive. And, in the context of the previous question where we were talking about this incredible proliferation of commercial capabilities, if you can bring all these different commercial networks into a portfolio with your own purpose-built military networks that may be able to do some very special things that the commercial networks can't do, and you're also able to bring your allies networks in there, and you create this sort of interoperable enterprise, well, that's a pretty powerful tool for resilience, because if you have many different paths the data can travel over, different frequencies, different orbits, different ground networks, totally different protocols on the networks, that gets to be a really hard problem for an adversary to shut the whole thing down. You might be able to get a little piece of it, but then you go operate on another piece of it and they may not even know where you are. So the approach to resilience that I see as the best for Space Force, and General Raymond has talked a lot about this, and he gets this when they talk about their space hybrid architecture and their space hybrid networking, is bringing together as many different networks as possible, creating optionality, and that's how you're going to stay resilient, and that's how you stay ahead of our adversaries too.
Yeah, I love that, and I think there's a lot of parallels to what we've seen in the world of IT in general, right? I mean, we're putting that in the space segment, we're putting it on orbit. A lot of these concepts are really great to see they're happening there. So what can be done to help accelerate this integration between commercial and military assets so they can talk to each other?
Yeah, and this is a hard problem, but the cool thing about it is there's sort of existence proofs about how to do this. And if you think about, I'll just set a little bit of context. If you think about what the internet is, it's a collection of disparate systems that are very different, right? Like you have 5G phones and LTE phones, and you have Wi-Fi, and you have Bluetooth, and you have TCP/IP. And for those of us that have been around a little longer, there actually were protocols before TCP/IP, and it wasn't, TCP/IP came out the winner, but there was other standards and circuit-based networks before datagram-based networks were the winner. And there's a set of protocols and a set of networking standards that sort of emerged to glue these things together. And that's really the right way to approach this too, is to look at these networks as individual networks and try to glue them together at the networking layer or even the application layer. I'll just say that the wrong way to try to do this is to standardize at the physical or waveform layer. And so there's been attempts in the past to say that this is the right waveform to use, or this is the best protected waveform. And that always creates difficulty in interoperability, because if you specify a waveform, then you're basically having to build a system around it, and you're going to make a bunch of trades that are going to create an inefficient system for anything other but that specific CONOP. But if you let the networks do their own thing and automate themselves and glue them together at the higher protocol layers, that's how you get interoperability. That's how we all have interoperability in our lives, right? We all, probably everyone on this webinar has a gateway router at home that does Wi-Fi and hooks to your cable or your satellite internet or whatever. In some cases, it does Bluetooth too, and it does protocol translation. And so having those gateway devices that can do protocol translation between different networks and having that network layer interoperability lets the networks go at the pace of the commercial market that's driving them. And then you can sort of glue them together to create that high level interoperability. And this is a hard problem, but the cool thing is the internet is the sort of existence proof that you can do it.
Yeah, I was hoping we wouldn't have to dive into the pros and cons of like token ring, Ethernet, and all the other kind of technologies we've seen over time. I would wonder, the government has long used bandwidth from commercial SATCOM providers. We saw this a lot in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, just completely saturated the military networks and looked to offload that into the commercial there. I mean, just this fiscal year, commercial SATCOM office within Space Force is forecasting over $2 billion of opportunities for commercial SATCOM services. So I'm wondering, just maybe paralleling that IT example we gave before, are you seeing increased interest in fully managed SATCOM services from the military, or do you see this being a similar evolution to like a cloud service adoption type?
Yeah, and I think we're seeing motion towards managed services on the SATCOM side, and I think that's really good. And we work closely with the commercial SATCOM office too, and we know them really well, and I'm really encouraged by the direction that they're taking. And this is organizational change can be hard sometimes, and there's a long history of putting together networks in the mode of what I call network integration, and that's where you buy some terminals and you buy some gateways and you lease some transponder bandwidth, and then you sort of integrate a network together around it. In many cases, those components are provided by different vendors, have completely different security postures, have completely different capabilities. And like any network, you're only as strong as the weakest link of your chain, and that tends to create situations that aren't really flexible and aren't really scalable. And that's the promise of managed services, where you have this flexibility and scalability. And a lot of the newer satellite networks, our network, the LEO networks, they're all managed services. And that seems to be the direction of the cutting edge commercial satellite communications capabilities. And the value of that is these networks are designed to work at scale. And so when the DoD adds its users and adds its partners to it, it's already part of a population that a network is designed to scale into, and it gives them the flexibility to add them. You don't have to buy it. It opens up new business models, because, for example, when you lease a transponder, you have to lease the whole thing, whether you use it or not. But in a managed service, you can pay by usage and you can pay by the gigabyte, and you basically only pay for what you need. And the service provider is able to sort of arbitrage their capacity across their other users. And it potentially creates a huge cost advantage for the DoD. And so that $2 billion of commercial SATCOM that Space Force Cisco is going to be buying, they're going to get a lot more bits for it than they would in past buying transponders and buying bandwidth. And so you also get network modernization built into that, right? So every single one of us that's a SATCOM provider and that has a commercial SATCOM service, you've got market pressures pushing on you to improve your flexibility, improve your cost per bit, improve your cyber defense, improve your efficiency, improve your latency. And so those market pressures come for free for the DoD when they buy a SATCOM as a service. And that I like to think about it as it's a change in the paradigm from acquisition-based competition, where the DoD would historically acquire something every 5 to 7 years, and it sort of draws a line in the sand of technology. But with a managed service, you get market-based competition, and you get the value of the free market pressing on the providers for you, and you get to ride the state of the art of that free market. And so I think the Space Force sees that, the government sees that. We see it in the Army too. They're looking at SATCOM as a managed service for their logistics network. And I think it's an exciting time, and the government is poised to get huge benefits from this as well.
That's great. So there is, and I think sort of similar to that sort of resiliency, there's a lot of hype around LEO right now, and rightfully so, around lower latency and things like that. But there's still room for geo capabilities and other orbits. How do you see, the sort of mesh of all these different orbits? How do you see defense sector's future use of geo versus LEO or MEO space capabilities, all around that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, this is something we look at all the time. And, my view is every orbit has value. There isn't one orbit that is the best orbit. It's like anything else where, for example, LEO, you mentioned, is good at latency because the satellites are closer to Earth. But there's so much more to any network than just the space asset, right? It's your ground network that affects latency too. And so do you have the right ground network that leverages the advantages of your space network? And so LEO is certainly good for latency, but GEO has advantages too. Just because of the nature of the orbital dynamics, GEO has the ability to concentrate capacity in regions versus spreading it across the entire coverage area. That gives GEO a little bit of flexibility to move capacity around in ways that other orbital regimes can't. And it's our position, and we look at this a lot, that GEO has better cost efficiency or bandwidth efficiency. And so one of the metrics we like to think about is gigabits per megabuck. And so the amount of data you can get on orbit per dollar, and GEO is going to be better at that than LEO. And so at the end of the day, GEO is going to be a little bit more economically attractive, but LEO has advantages, and then MEO has advantages too. In some cases, it has elements of both, and it can be kind of a Goldilocks zone depending on your ConOps. But really, the answer for DoD, and going back to the resilience conversation, is you need to have the ability to use all of these orbits, because in some cases you may care about capacity density. In some cases, you may absolutely care about latency. And in some cases, one user may care about it one day, one thing, and the other day, the other thing, or it may change by the minute. And having that sort of ability to leverage all these capabilities in a hybrid network, and having the ability to have automation make those choices for you so that you can use the right network for the right ConOp. And sometimes it may be the same user might have some data that should go over LEO and some data that would be better off going over GEO. And having the automation and the software-defined networking to make those choices for you is resilience and is value. And that's where I hope to see the Space Force and the DoD take their network enterprise.
All right, bring us home. So what are you seeing in sort of the newer commercial space developments or technologies that we should be looking out for in the next year? And what is Viasat excited about?
Yeah, well, obviously, we talked about LEO. So that's the expansion of the LEO capabilities is really exciting, and the simplicity and easy use of those has been really good for the industry. We're pretty excited about the Viasat-3 constellation that we'll be rolling out this year. And so starting in a couple months now, we'll launch the first of our Viasat-3 satellites. And those are GEO satellites where each satellite is more than a terabit per second of aggregate capacity. And that's spread across thousands of beams and potentially millions of users. But this is nearly an order of magnitude improvement in capacity and capacity economics. And so these are by far the highest capacity satellites on orbit. We'll launch 3 of them over the course of the next year. And altogether, they'll give us 5 terabits of total capacity. And that's 10 times more capacity than we have on orbit now. And so for Viasat, we're really excited about the expansion and what we can do and the type of services we can provide by basically having 10 times more capacity a year from now that we have now. And I think it's going to be transformational for us. And I think we've been working with the DoD and the Space Force. These satellites have some really interesting defensive capabilities and some really interesting resilience attributes in terms of being very resistant to jamming effects and being very flexible and being able to geolocate interferers. And we're really excited about the capabilities that we're going to be bringing online in the next year. And we expect to see the continued proliferation of commercial capabilities in general. And it's a really interesting market right now. It's a really interesting time in the space industry. I don't think we've seen this much change this fast anytime in my career, and I've been at this for a while. I'm really looking forward to the next year or two in space. It's going to be really exciting.
Well, I'd love to revisit this panel in that time frame and then look back on it and say 10 times as much bandwidth is not enough anymore, right? So we're quickly accelerating on that level. So really appreciate your time, Craig, and all the interesting insights and what Viasat's doing.
Yeah, Brett, thanks. It was great chatting with you, and I'll take you up on that offer, and we can talk about this in a year or two. And I think it's going to be one of those things where if you build it, they'll come, and we'll be like, holy cow, we need 10 times more bandwidth again.
That's right.